Better Buildings for Humans is powered by Advanced Glazings, makers of the Solera line of products. Solera is the leading glass glazing made specifically for architectural daylighting and with extreme insulation performance. Learn more at advancedglazings.com. Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Better Buildings for Humans. I'm your host, Joe Menchefski, and this is the podcast where we have conversations about the impact that the built environment has on our health, our wellness, our productivity, and our general joy of being alive. And of course, we always talk about sustainable design as well. Today, I'm going to have another exploration, another deep dive on designing for retail environments. And I've got special guests. I've got one repeat guest, Bryce Jarman from RH Carter in Toronto. And I've also got one of his coworkers, senior members from RH Carter, Shawn Houghtling. These guys do a lot of really cool stuff, including some retail for automobile dealerships. And so we're going to explore a couple of slightly different roads in understanding designing for retail. So first of all, hello, Bryce. Hello, Shawn. Welcome to the show.
Good morning.
Hi, Joe. Thanks for having us.
It's an absolute pleasure to have you guys. For the people that don't know, Bryce and Shawn and I and several other folks have worked together on Volvo Canada. So we know each other prior to this conversation. Today, again, we're talking about designing for retail. I always like to start by allowing our audience to get to know the guests. And though we've had Bryce on before, let's make sure that we introduce him again. Shawn, let's have you go first. Tell us about your background, the path that led you to becoming a principal at RH Carter.
Yeah, thank you, Joe. Yeah, for sure. Well, I'm an architect. Spent 8 years in the architecture mines to get my degree, I suppose. And I think my first day at RH Carter was actually 1999. So I kind of attribute my success to, basically I'll quote Vic Taybeck and say 80% of success is just showing up. So I've been around for this long. And so myself and my business partner, John Houghtling, are principals here at RH Carter. So, it's an industry that I've kind of grown to love in the space that we occupy over 25 years of working in the industry. And so here we are. And actually, as a side note, RH Carter, founded by Ron Carter in actually March of 1985, we're now moving into our 40th year of business. So we're extremely proud at our kind of longevity and, knock on wood, the hard work that's taken to get here. So, very happy to be here.
Yeah. Hey, congratulations. 40 years is a long time. 26 years is an impressive run as well, Shawn. So that's really cool. Bryce, let's hear a little bit about your background and how you ended up with RH Carter and the work that you're doing today.
Yeah, I went to university for something completely different. I studied geography and environmental studies. When I graduated that, I realized I needed to do something that I was more passionate about. So I went back to school and took a architectural technologist program, graduated, and started applying for jobs. I interviewed here at RH Carter, thought it was a great fit. Fortunately, they did too. And I started here in 2017. And just enjoyed every minute working here. It's been fantastic. Had the opportunity to work with a lot of great staff members and on a lot of different projects. And over the last few years, I've worked closely with Shawn on a few different programs. But yeah, it's been a fantastic journey. I've been here coming up on, 8 years, and it's been fantastic. It feels like it's been, no time at all. It's just flown by.
It's wonderful when you're doing something that you love. Let's talk about the kind of work you do. Let's do a little deeper dive. So, this episode hasn't been released yet, but I recently spoke to some folks from a firm called Little Diversified Architects. And there's two gentlemen at the Charlotte office who do retail, and it's primarily repurposing of existing structures. So it's a rebranding exercise, or sometimes repurposing an existing building that was doing something completely different and is now going to be a retail space. But they weren't so much given the opportunity to design, from a greenfield or even a brownfield sort of a scenario. You guys get to do both, from what I understand. You do get to design from greenfield, brownfield scenarios. But why don't you guys tell me a little bit more about it? Tell us about the range and the breadth of the work that you guys are doing in retail. Shawn, I'll get you to go first again on this one.
Yeah, for sure. Well, RH Carter is a full service architectural firm. And so that means we do everything from design schematics to the final walkthrough and commissioning of a building. So that involves new builds, renovations, retrofits, interior fit ups. So we can do everything. And being a medium-sized firm of about 36 people also means that we're fairly nimble and are able to kind of look at many different project sizes as well. But I think the unique thing of our office is the fact that, kind of over the 40 years, what we've done, and not to necessarily toot our own horn, but we've kind of grown and developed this kind of automotive industry or kind of program work that we've basically started here in Canada. And initially, the first program was in 91 with Infinity. And we kind of rolled out that brand as it entered into the Canadian market. They were looking at kind of creating a new dealer network for themselves. It didn't exist. So we worked with them to create a dealership network across the country. And then that led into doing the same work for General Motors and Ford, Nissan, Subaru, Volvo, BMW, Mini. We include about 17 various brands in the work that we do right now. So our office is kind of broken into these two departments, basically. One, which we dedicate to program work, which is this automotive, we're the Canadian architectural consultants for 17 OEMs and their programs across the country. And then we have this other half that is the typical traditional production work. So, from high-end residential here in Toronto and cottage country to commercial, educational, we've kind of done it all in that regard. So it's really just a full-service office.
Yeah, right on. Fantastic. You said, I think it was 17 OEMs. So is that like 17 different manufacturers that you have designed retail spaces for, or dealerships?
Yeah, exactly. So when you look at the automotive retail landscape across the country, we work with basically 17 separate brands and do their facilities across the country. Yeah.
That's amazing. So basically you guys own the automotive dealership industry in Canada, pretty much.
We would love to own everything, but no, there's always room for other people. But yeah, now we do a large part of it. And it's what we really love. I think everybody that's involved in this aspect of the office, who doesn't love cars? And so it's exciting. And it's also one of those kind of project types that you don't really think about in school. Like, I think everybody that we talk to that kind of graduates, nobody's designing a car dealership in architecture school. It's kind of an odd building type. But when you get into it, it is quite fascinating because it's a building that's designed for people, but then you're also including cars too. So there's these two kind of circulation paths that you kind of have to deal with, two different occupancies. It's kind of a odd duck. And then now more and more, they're becoming high-end retail. So, beautiful fixturing, beautiful lighting packages. They're really quite intricate buildings.
Yeah, and they're getting more beautiful and more comfortable all the time, too. We'll come back to that in just a minute. Yeah, well, if you've got that many brands that work with you guys, clearly you're doing something right. Like you've figured out, the basics, or at least in broad strokes, how to properly do those designs. So hats off to you. That's a remarkable accomplishment. Bryce, I'm going to ask you a different question. Let's talk about the difference between designing for retail versus designing for, almost anything else. What are the things that are particularly unique in designing for retail? And you can focus on auto dealerships if that's how you'd like to answer the question.
Yeah, I think in our experience with so much automotive retail, you're really looking at it from multiple perspectives. You have to consider the customers, you have to consider the staff that work there. And then further, we have separate building types. So we have the service department, we have the front of house with the showroom. You're really taking into consideration so many different uses, so many different spaces, but you have to make them all work seamlessly. And you have to make them work for different people. Everyone has different tastes. Everyone has different, expectations. So when someone brings their car in, they could have a different expectation than someone else entirely. But you have to be able to accommodate that. And I think we think about that every design we put together, and we work with the OEMs on those expectations that customers might have, and we work with the individual retailers on the expectations that their staff have. And we do our best to accommodate that in a complete package. So I think that's the mindset that we go into each project with.
Manage the connection between building occupants and the outside world using Solera translucent glass. Learn more at advancedglazings.com.
That's cool. And that brings up a question, Bryce. So how much control do you have over the form? Like, will the retailer, will the OEM hand you a form and then you have to work within that sort of design? Or do you have freedom to go right back to the blank slate and create the form? I know you have a lot of branding elements that you must comply with, but form, how much freedom and control do you have there?
Well, that really depends on the site. We've had the pleasure of working on a couple of Volvo stores together, and those are vastly different projects. One of them was a renovation, so we had to work within that existing form, whereas the other ones were new builds. So we had some flexibility there. And you can see that we work with the actual retailer to see how to form that to fit their operational flow while incorporating all of the branding initiatives and all of the requirements from the manufacturer. So it's really a mixture of, having some forms that are given to us and fitting all of our puzzle pieces in there in a pleasing way, or we get the greenfield where we get to work with the retailer and the manufacturer to create something that should be perfect for everyone.
Right on. Shawn, is there anything you wanted to add there in terms of freedom of design on form?
Yeah, well, I think Bryce kind of nailed it. Like, we're really, the issue is, and when we look across at the automotive landscape across Canada, certainly, I mean, the range of building sizes will be, I think, probably, the smallest, dealership that we've ever maybe worked on is something in around like 5,000 square feet, let's say, whereas probably the largest dealership in Canada is close to 200,000 square feet. So you've got quite a range, and you've got the difference between rural and urban, and what a dealership looks like in St. Anthony's, Newfoundland versus downtown Montreal is going to be wildly different. And that really is the fun part, because we get to look at how to make something look like whatever BMW or General Motors wants it to look like, but it has to fit within the parameter or fit within its context. So that's really where the fun is, trying to make it kind of brand compliant, but then also fit its size and its context.
Right on. I'm going off script again here because it's just something just popped into my head when you talked about the different brands. How different are the sort of the design parameters for a really high-end luxury brand versus, say, a more affordable brand? Is it just about more elements, or does the fundamental shape, the fundamental form change as well?
Well, I think what we look at is, and this is kind of, when we talk about branding and various brands, I think it comes down to the branding exercise. And when you look at a company trying to express itself and how it differentiates itself from its competitors and what the brand values are, and basically just kind of creating that niche. So I think these buildings, when we look at, let's say, premium versus something that may be a little bit more economical, I would say, it's not that the buildings are designed differently per se, but it's what are the values and where are these brands trying to go? So if we're looking at like a Porsche or Mercedes versus some of the brands that are maybe a little bit more affordable, the planning of the facility isn't necessarily different, but let's say some of the amenities or the quality of maybe some of the fixturing and furniture and stuff like that might be a little bit different. And then also too, maybe some of the spaces and in some of the areas that we would kind of give towards customer amenities might change as well, just based on the kind of the expectations of their clientele. And I think part of that is, part of this branding exercise is how do you address the niche that you're marketing to? Because these brands, they're not marketing to everybody. One brand is marketing to their segment. And so we try to fit that brand to the market. So that might mean certain design cues that we would use versus other ones. So it is unique, but I think ultimately designed to address their audience.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
I just want to say, I think also it goes back to the context comment that Shawn made too. You get a lot of the Mercedes, Porsches in a more urban, in a more metro area. So you end up with larger stores, which allow you to do a bit more with the space. A lot of other brands that maybe are more economical and have more dealerships, because they're spread out so much and they end up in some of the more rural areas, you do end up with a bit of a smaller space. So you have to be more conscious of what you're doing in there. You don't necessarily have the excess space to create some of the luxury areas that some of these other brands have. But overall, as Shawn said, the planning process and thought process is very similar, but it just depends on kind of the values and everything.
Okay. So you guys know my world well. You know, in the world of daylighting, obviously. How much of a role does natural light play in automobile retail?
Well, I think it's very important. I mean, I think historically, when you think of a car dealership in the showroom, it's a big single volume space with a lot of glass curtain wall around it. And the idea is to open that up visually so people can kind of see the cars, let the light in, and kind of show off the display. And then I think, though, as we become more sophisticated in what we do in understanding light and natural light, certainly, I mean, I think it's also, too, it's part of what's also attractive visually. It's good for you and it's healthy. And so also, too, trying to ensure natural light gets into all aspects of the building. So you don't have kind of offices in the deep, dark back that are closets. You want everybody to have natural light. And I think one of the biggest smartest changes that have occurred over the last 20 years, I would say, is just this attention paid to the service department. And so now you're seeing a lot of natural light being brought into the service department with clear story lighting, kind of at that higher level that will allow natural light into the service department that will bring light into there. So it's not just a big dark box. So it's creating just a nicer space. We don't need to light it necessarily to the same intensity with artificial lighting all day long. So it's just a nicer environment. And I think many studies have shown the power of that access of natural light, of views to the exterior. I mean, this informs healthcare design, home planning, absolutely. So it's vital and it's super important. And when we include it, people notice and people appreciate it.
Bryce, I think you mentioned that there was some really good feedback from Volvo with regards to the natural light in the service area. I think it was you that had mentioned that. Is that?
Yeah, I think we were able to put in a lot of clear story windows and glazing in Volvo Laval. It just creates such a better work environment, and really throughout the entire facility, as Shawn mentioned, we're seeing more skylights in the second floor office spaces, but certainly the service department, if you've ever been in an older one that doesn't have natural lighting versus one that has that natural lighting coming in, a quite different experience. And I think everyone wants to keep staff happy. So I think that's one thing that is being considered from the start of the design process.
Right on. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, let's talk about traffic flow. This is something that's always fascinated me. You mentioned, Shawn, it's a single volume space. Is there anything that you guys do in a conscious attempt to manage the flow of traffic, the way people move within a dealership?
Yeah, well, 100%. And I think that the way that we view this kind of coincides with a lot of the ideas that we look at when we talk about customer experience. And so when we talk about a customer journey or the customer path through a facility, and I mean, we're talking about automotive. So what are the critical touch points within an automotive facility, right, that kind of are important to the client? And so when you think typically about how, if you're a service customer, you arrive on site, you walk through the front door of the main entrance, you kind of experience the showroom for a moment. You typically will see the reception desk or somebody at reception. You may walk through the cars, but then maybe your next step is probably maybe a customer lounge or customer amenity area, coffee counter, stuff like that. And then maybe sales consultation areas or kind of the F&I or finance and insurance area. And that's just kind of, let's say that's the typical sales customer journey. So along that path is that opportunity for us to kind of reinforce the customer experience, to reinforce branding, because you think about what are those materials that they're touching when they open the front door? Is that a metal handle? Is it a wooden handle? What's the space that they walk into through the entranceway? Is it a compressed space that then opens up into something big, or do you walk right away into something big? So there's so many opportunities to kind of to guide the customer's journey and that customer path. And that's really where the magic lies in terms of how a brand kind of expresses itself and imparts its values and its kind of feeling and its vibe to the customers. If they're there for kind of a daily kind of grocery getter minivan, or if they're there looking to buy a high-end performance sports car, how we treat that customer is going to be different, and kind of the materials that they touch, the things they see, the lighting, and all those things will affect their experience and their journey.
Right on. Bryce, is there anything you wanted to add there? Or?
No, I think that covered it very well.
I want to talk about sort of proactive design with regards to branding. As you know, there's regular freshen ups, or, nobody keeps the same brand forever, or the exact same branding forever. They regularly freshen it up. That's a good term to use. When you're designing, do you think about the ability to sort of rip off some of the existing aspects of the brand and be able to then simply bring in the new aspects? Like, do you think about potential color changes or style changes and ways to make the rebranding a more simple, smooth process in the future?
Yeah, I think in general, I mean, we understand automotive retail, like a lot of other commercial or retail industries, has kind of a cadence to their buildings and to their programs, right? So, I mean, I think generally speaking, when we look at a car dealership, the branding that you see today probably has about a 10-year life expectancy. So within 10 years, you'll probably see a change just to reflect, the changing in the marketplace, change of attitude, and kind of following. We're seeing new car models every year, but that's not possible in architecture, although that would be great for us economically, but we can't do that change every year.
Yeah.
But so if we look at a kind of a 10-year life cycle, we absolutely, I think, try to design with the future in mind, knowing whenever we design the footprint of a building, we think about, well, how could this possibly grow in terms of the capacity? Does it need a bigger showroom? Will it need a bigger service department? Something like that. So we think about that at that level. But then we also think about, well, if you're doing something so wacky and then you change something 10 years from now, you don't really want to go in and have to tear down the whole store, because that seems extremely wasteful and probably is. But I think the best term that we've heard is just this notion of the evolution of a branding or evolution of a design that you can kind of, hopefully, the thing can build on itself and not necessarily completely throw away what you did before. Because I think ultimately the important thing, or I think the strongest brands, as we're going through the strategy to kind of create this identity and to try to show off these values that this brand has, I mean, that should kind of exist in its DNA, and it should follow through the evolution of itself. I think that's a good way to look at it.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, that's brilliant. Let's talk a little bit about Volvo and just a little deeper. I mean, we've worked together on the VRSE program here in Canada, something obviously that's near and dear to my heart. Can you guys explain the goals of that program and the major elements that had to be included to meet the objectives of Volvo's VRSE program? Maybe tell us what the VRSE stands for first.
Yeah, absolutely. It's the Volvo Retail Sustainable Experience. And really, it was introduced to really promote sustainability in the designing of the dealerships and just kind of echo their brand values that they believe in. And it was essentially an evolution of the design, looking to push sustainability in as many aspects as they can. And, we were able to have 3 facilities over the last couple of years that opened up in the VRSE design, 2 of which are LEED certified, and all 3 of them feature the Solera panels, which have been extremely well received and have contributed greatly to the daylighting, the heating. It's been well received program, and I think it's going to continue to be implemented. I think the notion of sustainability in design is growing, and it's something we're happy to be involved with.
What are the other big elements? You talked about the daylighting and the thermal control that comes with the Solera. What are the other sort of elements that were like must-haves in the VRSE initiative?
So we went for kind of products that use recycled materials, the implementation of renewable energy sources, so solar panels on the roofs, as well as making sure that there are EV chargers for all the electric vehicles that Volvo is releasing. So it was interesting. It was a very exciting exercise. We got the opportunity to kind of look into design materials that were local or were made with recyclable materials, sustainable manufacturing processes within the materials, items like that. And to get to, LEED certification in the car dealership was a fantastic achievement.
Right on. That's amazing. I'm going to ask our editors to see if when we go on YouTube, if we can splice in some images with Bryce and Shawn's designs, because it really is an extraordinary dealership. You've never seen anything quite like this before. Shawn, is there anything you wanted to add to what Bryce just walked us through there?
No, I think that he's covered it quite well. I mean, I think that Yeah, the importance, certainly from the Volvo program was that globally they've been really working to find a way to move the needle on their facilities to make them as sustainable as they possibly can. And I think without kind of strong arm tactics, I mean, they've really looked at creating a, kind of a checklist of items that retailers can implement to the best of their ability, which again, I think is a really good approach to this. And it's about, Volvo, both in Sweden and Canada, kind of taking a leadership role and saying, here's the roadmap that we can take to achieve something that's better for everybody. And let's go in this direction.
Do you want to bring lots of healthy, beautiful natural light in your building and still meet energy codes? Try Solera from Advanced Glazings. Learn more at advancedglazings.com.
So let's go beyond Volvo and talk about maybe the other 16 OEMs that you guys work with. How often do you hear conversations about indoor environmental quality? Like, we need to have sunlight, we need fresh air, we need to have, thermal comfort. Is that just kind of commonplace now, or is it a broad spectrum of, I'll say, commitment to these sorts of design aspects?
No, I think it's very strong talking point right now. I mean, I think the key areas of interest within automotive retail, for sure, is the idea or the notion of sustainability within the industry. And, certainly sustainability, it relates to the vehicles they're producing is one thing, but then certainly within the dealerships, how does the dealership become more sustainable? And so I think when we talk about all of those aspects, whether it's fresh air, ventilation, natural daylight, the materials that we use, I mean, sustainability is very important to most brands across the spectrum. And so I think we see that question has been asked of us by most brands and is something that we try to introduce and is really part of the documents that we use when we're designing these facilities. Are this kind of document called a design control document, or a DCD, which is something that kind of anybody related in the industry will understand this term, but it's like this Bible that kind of gives us the direction to, kind of design prototypes, the materials and the finishes that we use. But typically, again, across the board, we're going to have a section of that dedicated towards sustainability. So it's there and it's at the forefront of most people's thinking right now.
Bryce, is there anything you wanted to add there?
No, I just think it's definitely a growing interest in the industry. And I think we're seeing it just more and more come to the forefront. And I think it's fantastic.
Yeah. Oh, I agree. I think it's brilliant. Let's talk a little bit about online. I know it's an issue in every other retail, bricks and mortar retail industry, but in automobile dealerships, is there anybody buying cars online, or does everybody just still come to the dealership?
Well, I think it's an interesting market in that regard, because I think what people are seeing now is that, forgive me because I don't have the exact numbers, but I think historically, when people used to shop for a car, they would visit on average something like 6 to 7 stores during their shopping experience. And now I think that number is down to like, they might go to 1.5 stores, however they round that number out. So the idea is, if somebody's walking into your store, they've done all of their research online. I think people are doing their research online. And so by the time they get to a dealership, they're pretty much committed to your brand. And if they don't buy a car when they're in your store, then you've kind of made a mistake or something has happened to derail that process. So I think the car purchase, second to your house, the car is one of the most expensive things you'll buy. And I think the test drive is still important. People still want to open and shut the doors. They want to kick the tires. They want to make sure, they want to confirm that their research has proved them right and that they will buy that car, because certainly vehicles aren't getting cheaper. So I think bricks and mortar is still very important in that regard. I think also too, and again, we kind of go back to customer experience and the importance of that, is more and more time now is being dedicated towards the delivery experience. And what does that look like? So you get the keys handed to you, no longer are people kind of just sliding the keys across the table. There's a new vehicle delivery bay, and there's a delivery specialist in most dealerships now that's helping assist with that. They'll walk through all the technology of the car. You'll kind of walk around the car and learn everything there is to know about it before you leave the dealership. And then they also set you up for introducing, okay, when you come back for your first checkup or whatever, here's your new vehicle, here's the service reception area, here's the advisors that you speak to. So they kind of have that opportunity to go through all of that. So It's still very important, I think, bricks and mortar for automotive retail. But I think you're right. I mean, certainly online is very important, but I think from the research end of it,
Right. Yeah, that's a big shift, though. I mean, at the end of the day, that's a big shift. So instead of doing the research at the dealerships, they do the research online, and they've pretty much made up their mind. They're just kind of confirming a few details, maybe a few features. Did I actually want this? The heated seats, blah, 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 those kinds of things. And that's all that's happening at the dealership. Is that a correct interpretation of the conversation?
Well, I think it's the importance. I mean, the term that we'll use is omni-channel approach, right? So there's this kind of full spectrum aspect of branding. So the consistency of what a customer will see online. And if they start a conversation online with a certain dealership in their neighborhood, let's say they start building a car online, they have, their eyes set on whatever sedan or SUV, whatever. When they go into the dealership, ideally they should be able to pick up kind of where they left off online and kind of continue that conversation. And it should be seamless, and all of that information and all the things that they see online should extend into the physical world. And I think certainly there's opportunities for the salesperson in that dealership to also help. Part of their task is to also make sure that the vehicle purchase that a customer is looking at is maybe the right one. And maybe they kind of vet them through the process and say, well, you know what, maybe this is too much and you need this, or maybe, have you thought about doing this? So there's still a huge opportunity, I think, out there for conversations to continue. But without a doubt, people are doing a lot of heavy lifting online for sure.
Yeah, right. I would even say that goes to the service aspect too. I think once your car is purchased, people are looking at reviews online. They're looking at, where do I want to go to get my car serviced afterwards? What's the most comfortable experience? What's the best customer experience? So that goes to those amenities like the customer lounge and everything. When we design it, we want to make sure that if someone has to wait there for 2 hours while their car is being serviced, they can take a call or they can sit there and enjoy a coffee. And I think that shows up online when people are looking where they want to get it serviced. If there's 3 stores within a 15-kilometer radius of me, I'm going to go to the one that provides the best customer experience while I'm dropping off my car to be serviced, right? So I think it always needs to be in our mind and when we're designing for the entire customer experience, sales and service.
Yeah, that's a really important insight. From what I understand, much of the revenues come from the service side of things, like a very significant portion. Yeah. I'm not sure what the percentage is, but I know it's large. So that's a really important insight there.
Well, and Joe, be careful because you're going to get us excited about talking about this stuff. But
that's my job.
I mean, and I think that this is kind of where things start to get very interesting. When you talk about why people want to come to the store. And it's exactly this idea that whatever the brand might be, I think the ideal perfect state is that in creating this kind of brand identity, trying to infuse this building with kind of the values of that particular brand. And so whether you're a Subaru fan or Volvo or BMW, or you're just that Ford F-150 truck guy that you can't get enough of that stuff, if you can infuse that building with that kind of DNA that gets you excited as a consumer, the idea is that these places now kind of become, I think in a perfect world, like a clubhouse, right? So if you think about that, you're surrounded by your fellow truck geeks and you can talk about all the accessories that you can put on it and do all that sort of stuff. And I think you're kind of going to your clubhouse. And I think that's the excitement that a lot of these brands want to build. And it's the kind of thing that you're never going to kind of get that online. I mean, you want to go to a place where you walk in the door and everybody's like-minded and you can kind of talk that same language. So I think when we achieve that, and we can point to a number of stores across the country that have created these really wonderful spaces for kind of these various niche groups to gather. It's very exciting. And you can see that's the draw. Like you feel, nobody really wants to bring the car in for service, but I think you can kind of get excited by going and having those conversations and those chats with everybody because it is like going to your car club.
The space creates community, essentially.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, that's really cool. All right, we're getting close to the end. But before I wrap up, I just want to have a little bit of fun with the two of you. Let's go outside of automotive entirely just for a moment. And Bryce, I'm going to go first with you. Pick a retail store that you walk into and you go, man, oh man, what an absolutely brilliant design.
That's a good question.
Just for fun.
I guess I have 2 answers for this. One of them is not necessarily a retail store, but I had the opportunity to play golf in Portugal, and the clubhouse there was at the Palmeiras Golf Club was fantastic. It just kind of fit in with the landscape and just was very nice. It kind of felt like outside flowed inside and it just flowed back outside. So that was pretty impressive. But from a purely retail standpoint, I think going to the Starbucks Reserve Roastery in Seattle was quite an experience. They certainly make it interesting for anyone who walks in that door. There's tubes firing beans all over the place to get roasted. You can get coffee, you can get some alcoholic beverages, you can get merchandise. You can, I think, take a class to learn how to make certain drinks. And so that was quite the experience. And I guess a lot of people love it because there was a lineup to get into the store. I guess there's only a select few of them across the world, but that was a fun time.
Right on. Yeah, it's all about experience, isn't it? Shawn, how about yourself? Think about a retail environment that you walk into and you go, man, they got this. They nailed this.
Well, yeah, it's a very good question. I think that, I think there's a store that kind of impressed me. And to me, I just thought kudos to them was the Canada Goose. These
Right.
guys going into some of their stores, into the one here near the office, you walk into the store and they basically have you walk through this customer journey through the store. And you kind of learn about the brand. They do this through kind of effective lighting, through these visual displays. There's a cold room that you can go in and kind of put on their jackets to kind of see what that feels like in the cold. And it's really just this storytelling journey that people go through. And then at the end of the store, there's really not a whole lot of inventory there. And you think to yourself, these guys have a clothing store with basically no clothing in it. They're just telling the story. And it's like, kudos to them for doing this. And I think to Bryce's point, this place also has a lineup too sometimes, right? So I think for Canadian brand to have occupied their space in the world as, the winter coat, basically, that has become, speaking as a child of the 70s, a parka was never sexy, but somehow Canada Goose made parka sexy. And I just think what a strong brand, and they're just doing that storytelling in their stores. And I think that's super exciting.
Oh, right on. Yeah, I absolutely love Canada Goose. However, it is, at the time of recording, it is about the first week of March, and I'm absolutely looking forward to putting my parka away for a little while.
There we go. There's a time and a place for everything.
Exactly. All right. It's the time and place to ask the $1 million question, and you guys answer from whatever perspective you want. I'm going to start with Bryce. What makes a great building?
I think just a thorough design process. I think if you're thinking about all the aspects that go into it and everyone that's going to be using it, I just think that's how you get a great building. I don't think it necessarily has to be the most interesting looking to be a great building. I think it's all about your experience in there. And that's how I approach it. And I think that's how I'll approach it forever. So yeah, that's kind of how I would look at it.
Love it. Shawn, same question.
Well, and maybe I'll choose a political answer, but I honestly think, and I feel that this is correct, but I think the best buildings are designed in conjunction with the best clients. And we see this across our experience. I think that we've got some clients that are absolutely fantastic to work with, and that they're totally committed to building the best building because that's what they want. And they want the best space for their employees and for the people that use it, but also for their clients or even their houses that we've designed for them. And they kind of push us to work harder to be more successful. And I think without a doubt, the best buildings come from the best clients. And I think just like in the Renaissance, you kind of look to the patrons that kind of, paid the money for the great Renaissance architects. I mean, I think without the patrons, those buildings wouldn't exist. So it has to be the clients that make the building.
Fantastic. All right. Before we go, guys, do you have any exciting news or announcements or anything you'd like to share or promote before we wrap it up?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think, the news that we kind of led the top of the podcast with in terms of our 40th anniversary, we're super excited by that. And we can't divulge any of our top secret party plans, but we're just happy that we've reached this milestone. And I think we're super proud. But another piece of exciting news, I'll let Bryce kind of describe it, but I think our latest venture will be kind of launching into an international design competition, but I'll let Bryce talk about that.
Yeah, we do some international design competitions kind of regularly. It allows our staff to kind of flex their more creative muscles, ones that maybe aren't constrained by certain buildings or whatever, or the site parameters. or budget, we can get very creative. So we're entering a design competition for a spa in Portugal. And so I think the staff's pretty excited about that. I think there's a group of, 8 or 9 of us that are working on it. And we're excited to see where it goes. We've done a number of them over the years to varying success, and they're always fun. And I think the staff always enjoy the opportunity to be creative and have a change of pace at the office.
I cannot wait to see this. Please make sure
Absolutely.
I get to see that for sure. All right, guys, thank you very much. And Shawn, before we go, I know I owe you some skylight images, and I promise I'll get those to you within the next couple of days now that I'm back from vacation. Thank you guys so much. It's always a pleasure chatting with you, and I hope you survive these last couple of weeks of winter. Take care.
Thanks.
Thank you very much, Joe.
Bye.
Bye.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Better Buildings for Humans. For more information on the world's best light diffusing and highly insulating glass glazing, please visit advancedglazings.com.